What makes a super smelter good? How do they work? What's the best fuel to use? Should you build one? Why should you care? And what smelter can suit your needs? And most of all, why are there so many bad designs out there? In this video, I'll be trying to shed some light on these questions and present a new design that will suit a wide variety of players. It will never run out of fuel because it's easily attached to any overworld mob farm that produces bones and generates bamboo planks for fuel directly from the bone meal produced by the mob farm. This means that for one build, you can get both a wood farm and a super smelter using a fuel source that you may already have in abundance. And you could even add a simple wooden item crafting module if you like, or even craft scaffolding using the string from the mob farm and the bamboo you grow. Here are the rates for items smelted and planks using both of my previous mob farms as bone input, which by the way make more bones than other mob farms of the same type. The crafter item rates are a little more complicated and configurable, so I will explain those in that chapter of the video, but it makes thousands of wooden items every hour. And of course at the end of the video there will be full tutorials for all of these builds, plus an extra one that I think you might find useful. If you don't already have a beginner mob farm to supply bones, after you've cried a little, I highly suggest taking a look at my previous video where I go in depth on design optimizations and give a tutorial for this style of farm and for the bigger version as well. And yes, I did get a new skin since then. I was really blown away by the amount of gratitude and positivity this video received, and it really goes to show that a lot of you, like me, are discouraged by how many low effort designs dominate the YouTube algorithm and how difficult it can be to find real information on farms. And unfortunately, it's not any better for super smelters either, so I think it'd be a good idea to do another blind test and see what the algorithm thinks is good, and I think we all know how this is going to go. So here we are back on YouTube, and I just want to kind of convey the frustration that normal people have whenever they're trying to find a farm on YouTube. Even if you search for something simple like Minecraft Super Smelter, all the results are targeted towards extreme beginners, and there's a lot of repeating designs here. Mainly like this sort of design is repeated everywhere, but it's really not ever done perfectly. Really, there's just a lot of stuff here that's kind of designed to take advantage of people who don't know any better about super smelters. It's kind of depressing, but let's hop into creative and see if we can fix this common design, because I don't think people are making this the right way. So here we are, and I've gone ahead and copied over one of the most popular designs. I'm intentionally not going to share what video specifically this is from, firstly because this is something that could be made by anyone really, and secondly because I don't want to try and pick fights with people specifically or make it seem like I'm knocking a particular channel when maybe not everything they do is necessarily bad. But there are redstone sins here that way too many people are committing, and it's my job to fix them. First off, the thing that makes me the most mad out of everything about these smelters, when people use an entire redstone block instead of any solid block and a lever. It's just so wasteful. Like, I get that this doesn't use very much redstone and that anyone could find the redstone for this, but why wouldn't you make it more efficient, especially if it's for a beginner system if you can? And secondly, another thing that bothers me is that almost every single one of these videos do not have the optimal number of powered rails, this one included. And what I mean by that is when hopper minecarts or chest minecarts are more full, they take more powered rails to get going. And as I'll talk about later, we want exactly one item in every furnace, even whenever the hopper minecart is completely full and it's at its slowest. So that means that there is an actual number of powered rails that is exactly correct for each furnace array, including small ones like this, and no one is doing it. They either spam powered rails like willy-nilly just because they don't feel like figuring it out, or they undershoot powered rails like this farm right here, resulting in more items in one particular furnace than others whenever the cart is full. See, I only let this run for a few seconds, but 7, 7, 9, 8, 6, like what? So here's a version that I'm not even kidding when I say that I put this together in about 5 minutes, and I think it makes a lot more sense. This is post-edit potato here. It's been more than 5 minutes, and that version did not make sense. Basically on that last version, I thought I had already optimized all the powered rails to be the absolute minimum possible, but I didn't, and I was a failure. This version uses the absolute minimum number of powered rails like you wouldn't believe. Also not using the redstone blocks because levers and blocks are way cheaper, as we talked about, and we're adding slabs wherever we can because we're poorer than the amount of money in my bank account. And lastly, we're using chest minecarts instead of hopper minecarts because they're cheaper, number one, and number two, building a smelter like this, you don't need to smelt a whole shulker box's worth of items. And kind of a nice little quality of life thing is I added 2 different levers here so that you can actually control which minecart goes independently of the other one. You just want to make sure that you turn off the lever before the cart gets over here so it doesn't get stuck on like this half of the powered rail, but that's pretty easy to do. And just to show the distribution to you, all these furnaces are completely empty as we are now, and we'll go ahead and send this, and you'll see that there's only one item in all of these, and we'll get exactly 2 whenever the item comes back, meaning that this thing is distributing completely evenly to all these furnaces here, even whenever the cart was full when I started this. And you might think that all these features are just kind of common sense, but I promise you, I tried to find a smelter that checked all the boxes that this one does on YouTube, and I just couldn't find anything to save my life. I know that some people will just want to build a small smelter like this and nothing else, so I'm going to provide that service because all the clickbait people are slacking. But with all that said, I would actually recommend that you make my bamboo super smelter if you are at all up for the task, because it's really convenient to actually be able to get infinite fuel for one of these things. So now that we've made a better version of YouTube's recommended smelter, let's jump into super smelting theory and how we can make better furnace arrays. At the heart of everything is the furnace. Most smelters will of course be using this block, which is capable of smelting any item in the game in 10 seconds, or a maximum of 360 items every hour. There are also 2 variants that can smelt specific items faster. The blast furnace, which only smelts metal, ore, and some armor, and the smoker, which only smelts foods, even though we all know the baking of potatoes to be highly unethical. Both of these smelt at double the rates of the furnace, 1 item every 5 seconds, or 720 items every hour. But both of these can't smelt some very common items like glass or wood logs, so almost all arrays just use normal furnaces to be able to smelt anything in the game. And I didn't actually know this, but apparently you can change the inside text of any of these by renaming it in an anvil, so you might could rename them to something more appropriate. Next, we need to speak about item flow into and out of the furnace. A hopper facing into the top block will input the items you need to smelt into the top slot of the furnace GUI. However, this top slot in particular allows any non-smeltable item as well, which is really annoying and you typically need to prevent that from happening. Likewise, a hopper pointed into any side of the smelter, including its face, will put a fuel source into the slot that will be burned. This slot will only accept fuel sources and no other items. This feature can potentially come in handy for pre-filling fuel in our tutorial later. And finally, a hopper underneath the furnace will take out the smelted items from the right side of the furnace GUI only after they're smelted and doesn't interact with any other slot, the one exception of this being that they can also take out empty lava buckets after they've already ignited in the furnace, which is pretty cool. Additionally, hopper minecarts can also pull these items out of furnaces as well, so the bare minimum number of hoppers per furnace array we need for any super smelter is at least 2 for input and possibly 1 more for output below if we don't use hopper carts. These are the only practical ways to get items into and out of furnaces automatically. So now we run into the basic theory behind super smelters. We want to have a large number of furnaces burning at the same time and to spread our items out equally among them. This ensures that the total amount will be smelted in the minimum possible time for how many furnaces we have. In a perfect world, we would have exactly 1 furnace for every item we want to smelt, and we would instantly distribute every item into them, meaning that we could theoretically have any number of items that could be smelted in only 10 seconds. But in reality, we run into issues. We can only distribute items so quickly, and after they're smelted, they then have to travel to some sort of output station for the player to actually pick them up. And it's the transportation of these items that actually poses the challenges in design. This means that good smelters are really problems of item distribution and item collection more than anything else. How do we spread these items and fuel out equally to each furnace as fast as possible, even if we have an absolutely giant number of furnaces? How do we get them back to the player quickly? So the most common answer to this is minecarts. Both hopper minecarts and chest minecarts are capable of carrying items. When they travel faster than 2.5 blocks per second over hoppers, they can then distribute exactly 1 item per furnace like we need. Most super smelters use this for both smelted item and fuel distribution, with a few exceptions you can look at in my world download information resource. Because minecarts have a top speed of 8 blocks per second, that means that 1 cart can theoretically distribute items to 80 furnaces burning continuously. In the real world though, you have some loss from accelerating the cart and also slowing down to pick up items, so the real limit is probably a little bit under 64 furnaces or so, depending on a few factors like your average speed and the geometry of the tracks between the furnaces and the turns. Because fuel will burn to completion no matter how many items are actually in the furnace, this means that if we don't get another smeltable item back into the furnace within 10 seconds after the first one, we'll be wasting our precious fuel, which we don't want to do. You could also just use more minecarts to get around this, but then there's some added complexity and cost. So if you're like me, you may be wondering about how to minimize powered rails. What's the minimum distance between them to stay above 2.5 blocks per second? Should you use 1 rail or 2 rails per segment? Well, there is a definite answer that I will get to, but it is more complicated than you might think. What's important to know is that how much rails accelerate minecarts varies with the amount of items in hopper carts or chest carts. If they're completely full or completely empty, hopper carts and chest carts will accelerate in the exact same manner. And something that I actually didn't know before making this video is that it turns out that using just 1 powered rail every now and then is a lot more more efficient in the long run than if you use groups of 2 powered rails like this, and that doesn't matter if you're not distributing items or if you are distributing items in hoppers, it's pretty much always more efficient that way. But when we do a quick test of hopper minecarts versus chest carts delivering items to hoppers, we find that over time the hopper cart clearly pulls ahead and needs less powered rails as time goes on as compared to the chest cart. What's going on here? Didn't they just behave exactly the same way earlier? The answer is that in more simplified terms, the acceleration value of a cart behaves in kind of an inverse or opposite manner to how signal strength does in a comparator, which means that what acceleration values care about is whether the cart is completely full or 1/2 full and so on and so forth, instead of the actual number of items that are in the cart. So this means that because hopper carts have way less items total than chest carts, it takes way less time for them to become completely empty when driving over rails, which means that they start accelerating faster sooner and start needing less and less powered rails. But this also means that the true optimal number of powered rails in a super smelter depends on both the type of cart used and also the number of items that cart has already distributed. If you really want to simplify it though, I found that for a chest cart, 10 unpowered rails in between powered rails will always be enough to get 1 item per furnace, and for a hopper cart, 11 unpowered rails between powered rails will also do the trick. Although in reality, you could probably get away with a little bit less than this every now and then, it might be a little bit easier to simplify it this way for some people. And of course, these numbers are assuming a flat track, and at the beginning of this track, you would need 2 powered rails like this to get it up to speed initially from rest. So long story short, you can go with those numbers, or you can just test and find out exactly where it starts distributing 2 items instead of 1, and either one of those will work just fine. Some super smelters made by the technical community shoot for precise timing to get another item exactly when the first one is smelted. They do this to avoid item buildup and sometimes to keep the hoppers locked as long as possible for less lag. Personally, I don't really think these features are necessary for most arrays under maybe 64 smelters or so. For most non-technical Minecraft cases at least, where you're not bringing your server to its knees every other day. Even in a tiny 16 times smelter, an entire shulker box of items would distribute to under 2 stacks per furnace, and that's before you would have started smelting anything at all. So that's more than enough to fit in there and the hopper with plenty of room to spare. So for beginners' needs, there's really no danger of overfilling any of these furnaces and backing up items. Plus, hopper locking on furnaces 64 times and below is really only something to be concerned about if your world is already really struggling for performance. I was never able to notice a difference for my 64 smelter that was not hopper locked on my server or my single player. It's probably not really going to make a difference for most people, for arrays of that size that is. And speaking of performance, something else that's good to add, and much easier than hopper locking, because hopper minecarts cause a lot more lag than individual hoppers, using an activator rail to lock them whenever they don't need to pick up any more items can help reduce the lag as well. Many beginners don't even know about this feature, which is pretty cool if you know when to use it right. This is another thing that technical Minecraft players will insist on, and it's good if you can do it, but it really doesn't make that much of a difference for small arrays. I'm sorry. I can hear the TMC players running to the comments as we speak. But activator rails are so cheap, it's really a good idea to throw them on furnace arrays of any size. Next, let's talk about fuel. What fuel should we even be using? I personally believe that the short answer is what's most convenient for you, or what you already have a farm for in your world. Some people will swear by carpet duping until it inevitably gets patched someday, like zero tick duping was, and others may already have a wither skeleton farm for coal, or a lava farm for a basic setup. While these things dominate the YouTube algorithm and can be useful for beginners, I wouldn't be afraid to dream a little bigger than something like this and stop doing manual labor every time you smelt something. I can hear every single noob typing in the comments, "Oh, lava's so good, it burns so many items, yeah. Well, you can put lava in all the other arrays that have item input here. I'd personally recommend a fuel source that lasts long enough to at least burn 1 item, but that doesn't burn too long, because you don't want this fuel source, after you're done with all your items, to be smelting for a long time and wasting a whole, kelp block or a whole lava bucket whenever you just need to smelt a few items that are spread out over the whole system. Because most people want to build a mob farm at some point in their world, we can actually hijack the bone output from the system to autocraft bone meal based fuel, the 2 easiest options being bamboo and kelp systems. So if we compare the two, we'll see that after all the math is done, the bamboo planks are more efficient than raw bamboo and will smelt 1 item for every 2 bone meal supplied. Kelp requires a separate smelting and crafting stage for added complexity, but will smelt 11/9 times the initial amount of bone meal. What all that means is that using the same bone meal source, kelp will smelt 22/9 or 2.44 times more items than using bamboo planks. But getting a lot of planks in storage is way more useful for most people and beginners than getting a lot of kelp, and bamboo can keep the system system much more simple. So which is better is pretty subjective for a beginner system and will really depend on your needs. So now that we have a good understanding of smelters and how they work, let's go through our particular design goals for this farm, because as always, what makes a smelter good is relative to the redstone experience of the player, and we need to target our particular niche. So I want this thing to be useful to all beginners as well as technical players in the early game. I want the design to be simple and it to be easy to understand. I want it to balance cheap materials yet quickly smelt items, and I want it to be a low effort and high reward fuel source. So assuming we have a bone block input at the rates of my large mob farm, here is what the two opposing systems would look like for both kelp and bamboo. As you can see, bamboo is much smaller and produces enough to fuel 16 furnaces, while the large mob farm is making bones, so I have it storing up in these double chests to input into a simple 32 times smelter array. So to begin, we have bones that are being run through this hopper line into this crafter, which is then immediately placing them inside this dispenser, and all of the bone meal that doesn't get growed by that will actually be overflowed into the hopper below and go into the second dispenser, because just one is not quite enough for the rates we're getting. And down here I added an optional toggle lever, and that will enable you to lock and unlock this bottom hopper here, and what that does is it will either send the bones into the bamboo system, or if it's unlocked, it'll send the bones into this other crafting system, which will first craft the bones into bone meal items, and then that will craft them into blocks, and then that would put them in the mob farm chest that was right in front of this crafting system. So if you're wondering what the clock actually is that's powering all this, it's this weird torch clock which uses the powering and depowering of 2 torches to generate a redstone pulse every 4 game ticks. This pulse strongly powers this block underneath the crafter, and it also, because of that, this redstone dust strongly powers the bottom crafter and then weakly powers the top crafter. Interestingly enough, whenever you put a repeater on this 4 game tick clock and have an observer observing it, it then converts it into a 6 game tick clock, which is the ideal frequency for growing the bamboo back here. And here I added a lever to make the pain that is piston noises stop if you don't want to get tinnitus. You can shut this whole torch clock down if you like. Keep in mind there's a small chance that the torch clock doesn't work properly the first time you start it, so it may take a try or two before the torch clock gets working properly. And around the front here you can see that all the bamboo items are being dropped onto these mud blocks right here. This flowing water is just because of some weird item cooldown shenanigans with the hoppers underneath. Around down here we have 3 hoppers that are sucking up the bamboo and inputting it into this crafter, which is crafting the blocks of bamboo, and all those bamboo blocks are being put into the second crafter, which is crafting them into planks. And the factor that limits the system is if it goes above 2 times hopper speed of bamboo items or more than 18,000 bamboo items every hour, then the system will start to break down. And that's where the limiting number of the 4,000 bones every hour comes into play, because that's whenever that hits that number. Next, we'll see that all these bamboo planks are being sent into this dropper, which is also being powered by the same redstone signal line, and that will drop the planks into a water column that'll float them up pretty quickly, and then they'll get pushed by this water stream into this cart up here. And this minecart with hopper is sitting on this detector rail. Whenever it's not here, the item entities will be pushed against that block like you just saw, meaning that they'll always be here and waiting to go into the cart whenever it comes back from the furnaces. So if we take a look at the redstone here, we'll see that there's a comparator that's reading the fullness of the hopper minecart with this detector rail it's sitting on. This comparator has a signal strength of 15 running into this side, which means that it'll only fire whenever this cart is completely full. This is important because very infrequently there will be a bamboo loose item that will escape from here, and we don't want that getting in the cart. So having it mostly full acts as kind of a pseudo filter so that just the planks can get inside of it like this. And whenever the cart's completely full, it'll power this block, which will then power this one and unlock this trap door so that the hopper can go on its way to all the furnaces. So let's get the glass back in so you can see what this really looks like. The glass placement looks a little bit more confusing than it is, but it's really just to box in all the item entities and the water around here. Bamboo has an equal chance to grow either 1 block or 2 blocks tall, and it actually needs to have 1 more extra block above this because you can kind of see the item entities kind of float up a little bit. And so that means that they can spill out a little bit more if the glass is just directly above the 2 blocks tall version. That's why both of these are 1 block higher than it seems like they would need to be. And as we progress here, we'll see that we reveal the system where the hopper with minecart travels over all of these hoppers, which distribute it into all these chests. Up here, we have the 2 activator rails, which are optional. If you want to add that system, you can. It's not really super important for here. Technical players might care about it, but it's really not necessary for most beginners, to be honest with you. These chests also make sure that we distribute items to both of the furnaces underneath with these 2 hoppers under the double chest. So this is a pretty nice way of having a good amount of storage and also to distribute items to both chests and each slice. Although it does mean that we have a few extra hoppers up top, I think this system is worth it even for beginners. And how I'm getting the items into this item collection chest right here is just by simple hopper lines. And you may be asking yourself why I'm using those instead of hopper minecarts, because hopper minecarts are technically a little bit cheaper on the iron. And really that's because there's already a good amount of hoppers back here anyway that you probably need an iron farm for, so a few more isn't really that bad. And that's due to the simplicity factor in our design goals, and it's just simpler to do it this way, and you probably already need an iron farm anyway, so it's not a big deal to do this instead of cart yeeting. And finally, we have the system that delivers the smelted items to the tops of the furnaces here. So if we take away all the unnecessary blocks here, we'll see that the hopper minecart will rest on this unpowered rail right here. This water is underneath a double chest above where you input your items. This is a cool system that I believe Fortune 8 Diamond was the first one to make, and I've kind of modified this a little bit with the powered rail here, where he was just using a normal rail, which is a pretty nice little feature to add in here. This allows us to have a really easy way to stop the farm whenever we run out of fuel, which is accomplished by this comparator, which is reading the double chest behind it. And so whenever that double chest is completely empty, comparator will turn off like you see it here, and this powered rail will depower, stopping the minecart and awaiting more items in the chest. And that ensures we have enough fuel in all the furnaces, which is really nice. And if we want to, we can manually depower this comparator using the subtract mode and a lever here, which is the manual cart stop. And so you'll see that if we distribute items into this chest, the hopper will be able to pick up more than 32 each time it comes underneath and is slowed down by the water, meaning that we'll make sure and get more than 32 items going to all the chests here. And of course, here also we have optional activator rails, which will lock the hopper whenever it gets here, and then round back on the other side will unlock it whenever it needs to pick up items from the chest. And that's really about all there is to this system. There's a decent amount going on, but it's not that bad, and it's pretty darn cheap. Because the hopper minecart gets more than 40 items from this chest, you could increase this to a 40 times smelter. You would just need to re-optimize the powered rails again if you wanted to make something like that. Really, a 32 times smelter is a lot nicer on specific item stacks like 16, 32, 64. But that's really all there is to know about this smelter. It's not really too bad. There's a decent amount going on, but it's really cheap for what you get out of it. And really quickly, I also made a bamboo version of this. I don't think it's as useful for beginners as the others, but I wanted to make it because I knew people would say, kelp is more efficient, you should make a kelp version, potato. Well, I made the stupid kelp version and I'm not doing a tutorial for it because I don't have infinite time to make tutorials. But the LiQWYD schematic for this is in the description, so please do not complain that I did not make a tutorial for this when I am giving you the resource for free. This is using a version of Strom's tileable kelp growers that I found from a cool video of his, so I'll link that in the description. I modified the clock to be a little bit more efficient, and I think it's an improvement, so you'll see that in a second. But it first works by the bone meal items being aligned on these hoppers going into each of these dispensers here, and each of these slices will be growing hopper speed kelp. This is similar to the growing and breaking of the bamboo, but it's on a different clock because of the water being necessary to grow kelp. So you see that the water will refill and everything will get grown and broken at almost exactly the same time. The clock is an 8 game tick observer clock, but it's in a different place that I think is a little bit better. And we're using activator rails because they're a little bit cheaper, and also the rail system goes down here in a way that I think makes a little bit more sense for the form factor. Because whenever this hopper runs out of bone meal, that means that it just ensures that whenever there's no more bone meal in the system, we'll turn off this comparator, which will depower the clock here and stop it from running. And so then all those kelp items get dumped into the water stream and will go into a hopper minecart system. If you want, you can add the activator rails as well to lock and unlock the hopper minecart when necessary. And revealing the whole picture, it's not too hard to get an idea of what's going on here. So we have all this kelp that's being smoked. We have an exact number of smokers that are handling all the kelp from the general mob farm, and that's being dumped into this hopper line, which we have to kind of add a janky second one because it's getting to be more than hopper speed of dried kelp through here. That's going to a single crafter that's being powered by this observer clock. That's going to craft the dried kelp. All these blocks of dried kelp will prioritize all of the smokers first. So that's what this other hopper minecart's doing back here. And if all these kelp smelters are full, then this cart will slowly build up until eventually this comparator reads signal strength of 4, and so that will reach this torch here, which will depower this and switch the rail in order to enable all the kelp blocks to go into the super smelter storage here. And besides that, this smelter is exactly the same as on the bamboo version because I didn't feel like doing anything different. Cool thing is, if you build this at my general mob farm, this super smelter that has 40 furnaces here will never actually run out because of the continuous bone meal supply up here. So this system would probably be better if you wanted to add, a shulker box unloader right here, that'd be a pretty darn cheap way to do quite a lot of smelting continuously. So it looks like 40 times smelters are able to smelt about 14,400 items per hour. So I'd probably go with a 2 times hopper speed shulker box unloader right here for the input if you did want to do that. And you would also need a 2 times shulker box loader if you did want to make that system there. But I'm not going to make that in this video. And lastly, I also spent a bit of time making what I think is a very beginner friendly wooden item crafter as an optional attachment here. It can make any planks only crafting recipe as well as a few of the planks and stick ones. And for this setup, here are all the individual crafts that can be made, and here are the rates that go along with them. And that's if you're running all of them at the same time with the large version of my mob farm. So what's important to know is that you can either split all the planks evenly between all these, or you could individually lock some of these slices in order to not produce some of that item, since this will lock the hopper and not deliver planks to these specific crafters. Yes, there is the possibility that whenever you lock this, it will craft the wrong item in here because it might be in the wrong shape. That's kind of the price you pay for a very simplistic system like this. Most of the time it won't do anything, and since you're manually getting them out anyway, it's not really a huge hassle for a beginner system like this. That's just kind of the trade-off you have. And taking a look at one of these slices, it's really about as simple as it can be. So we pre-make the shape of the item we want in here, and whenever it fills up with points, we'll get a signal strength of 9, which is being compared by this redstone dust into this side here through this comparator. So when that happens, we'll get a pulse, and that will craft the item. It'll go down into this barrel and down into this very simple storage here. This comparator is reading signal strength 9 from a crafter. You could do other blocks to achieve the signal strength. May not be the cheapest option, so feel free and use whatever you want to get the signal strength of 9 there. And this comparator will actually feed into 2 of the crafters here, so it's a way of splitting that signal strength and having it apply it to both of them, because it's still going to be 9 even if there's a different shape here. So once you've seen that slice, it's really not hard to understand what else is going on here. We're just kind of repeating that pattern on different sides. Pretty much the only weird thing on this side is this little curve in the rail, which is just an easy way of getting more items into this crafter, which is crafted chests. And that's just because it takes a lot of items to craft chests, and people typically want them more than the rest of these other crafts. So I added 4 hoppers going into this crafter instead of just 1. So that way it's an easy way of prioritizing this a little bit more than the others. At the end here is another place where things get a little bit different. This is where the sticks are produced, and they will be traveling into pre-filled crafters here. These sticks are crafted in this last crafter of the first system, and they travel along this hopper line into as much or as little storage as you want. But they do need to be pre-filled into these crafters that have all the planks and sticks already in them. These slots don't need to be completely full, and I'll show that in the tutorial, but they do need a bit of sticks in order to fill in whenever the system first starts. How this system works is once you have the sticks in there, the cart will go and deliver a certain number of planks into each of these 3 crafters. So in order to never run out of our pre-fill, we want to make sure that at least 2 planks get in here whenever the cart goes over once and over again another time. So this first crafter just has 1 hopper pointing into it, so that will give 1 plank whenever the cart travels down and another one whenever it travels back. This second crafter is crafting the fences, so it will need 2 down and 2 back for a total of 4 every time the cart goes. So we have 2 hoppers, which accomplishes that. And the last one is the same exact method, but with 3 down and 3 back because there are 6 slots. So that's why there are 3 hoppers for this last one. And you may be wondering why this one is closer to this one. And that's because the orientation of these does matter if you want to minimize these rails over here. So make sure and build it like this, and even though these are a little bit close to each other. And so what happens with this is that every time the cart travels down and back, we'll get 1 pulse of this detector rail, which will craft all of these once. And since we have the perfect amount of items delivered and going back every single time, that ensures that these get completely filled back up every single time, or filled back up to however much you filled them in the first place. And here for sticks, we actually need 2 hoppers in order to keep up the sticks and make sure that they remain replenished the whole time. And that will mean that we craft 8 sticks every time, which is a little bit more than we actually need because we have 4, 6, 7. And because that will start to build up sticks and eventually spew out items from this crafter if we don't do anything, I have a comparator here, and this will tell us whenever they're starting to get too many sticks in this hopper, and that will just go down here, power this target block, lock the hopper, and at that point the sticks would no longer be crafted until this hopper starts to get a little bit lower. And so then that would unpower the target block again, allow the sticks to start being crafted again, and repeat this cycle indefinitely to fill it whenever it needs it. A little strange, but it's a very cheap and simple way of getting these items that I had never seen done before. And in case all this interconnectedness wasn't enough for you, I actually went ahead and made a scaffolding crafter add-on that you can add to this. This is just a little bit of extra redstone at the bottom in order to convert the raw bamboo into scaffolding, which also uses some string that you can just ferry over from the farm. This is extremely simple and it's just an easy way to dump the string over there into this double chest, and then it'll craft 6 scaffolding for each of these individual string items. And at the rates that the farm produces bamboo, it'll produce about 17.3 thousand scaffolding every hour, the same number as the raw bamboo, which is also 1.5 times the number of bone meal inputted to the farm as I mentioned earlier. So that means that the number of scaffolding is hard capped at the same rate as the number of bamboo that the farm can produce per hour, which is 18,000 and no more than that because of the double hopper speed limit. So this just uses a 24 game tick clock with a few fail-safes involved in order to make sure that this crafter never runs out of bamboo and string. And so the two fail-safes is number one, if the string runs out, then this comparator will depower, meaning that this torch will power and lock the clock here. The other fail-safe is this bottom hopper here. Whenever this hopper is empty, it indicates that the farm isn't producing any more bamboo for whatever reason. Maybe you're down here messing with it, but essentially that would depower this comparator here, which would stop the clock as well. And so if both of those conditions are met, then you'll get this kind of slowish pulse cycling going on here. And the only things you have to change whenever you have this installed is you have to remove this dust leading into the other crafter so that we won't craft very fast from the torch clock anymore. And additionally, you have to place that dust right here in order to be powering this on the clock from this repeater going into that dust. And then the only other slightly annoying thing is that you'd have to turn the crafter and point it this way instead of into the other one. The system isn't really the cleanest as it's not designed to be a scaffolding crafter, but it's a nice little add-on that makes it not too bad to switch if you do want to produce scaffolding instead of planks or wooden item crafting. And at the end of the tutorial, I'll also have a little segment showing how to build this and how to switch between different modes once you have it installed. And now's the time where I want to give a huge shout out to a brand new mod called Lucidity and its creator, Ryan. And I'm not even joking when I say that this mod is probably one of the biggest for redstone content creation since Carpet mod. Of course that's subjective, but this mod is seriously cool. Say you have a really cool testing world where you do a lot of iteration, have a lot of designs, but then you get one that you like and you want to isolate it from everything else. And all you have to do is pick up a breeze rod or whatever item you define the mod to use and then select a bounding box. Then you go ahead and drag that entire bounding box all around the item you want to isolate, and you'll right click to set the other point. Once we have our selection in the right spot, we'll go ahead and add it. And inside the selection, we can either do things to blocks, or we can do things to entities, or we can do things to particles, but I'll stick on blocks for now. There are a lot of options for each of these modes, but just know that you could isolate anything inside and anything outside the structure using the different modes here. So say I want to isolate this redstone build from the rest of the world, so I could scroll around until I get the render all inside mode. And as you can see, all the blocks in the world are only rendered inside the bounding box, which is super cool. And we can apply this same mode to the entities. And now you see that only the entities in the world are inside this now. Say I want to get rid of this pesky glass in that lectern because I want this shot to be even better. So then I don't have to change the blocks to render inside, excluding specific content. Then I go into the mod settings for Lucidity. Then I can list gray stained glass and lecterns among the selected blocks and save that. And so then, since I'm excluding those two blocks, you'll see that this is entirely isolated by itself now. But even better, you can also take selections out of pieces that already exist. So to simulate the amount of bones coming into the farm, I set up an infinite hopper using Carpet mod, and that actually is dropping into here on this timer. But I didn't want this timer to show because that's not how the farm actually looks like. So what I did was I selected this area right here, then I cut it using Lucidity, and it's gone, just like that. And now I can fly around this farm and show you piece by piece exactly what it does without having to change the world at all. And I can also cut it up piece by piece and selectively reveal more and more of the farm to show you exactly how it works like you just saw. And right now the mod is still under development, but there's a lot of other stuff that Ryan's also putting in here, or highlights damage indicators on mobs, highlighting fluid sources, explosion visualizers to show the rays of explosions and which blocks they'll interact with and how much damage they'll do. All these things are extremely powerful and useful to TMC folks. And this means that I can do really cool stuff like answer all the people who wanted to know if I can make a creeper farm out of the general mob farm. Would you look at that? There's only creepers spawning now. That's crazy. And even cooler, it also works with flashback too. So if I have a replay of a farm in the middle of a world and I want to isolate it there, I can just hop right in and do it from the creative mode in flashback. Just get a breeze rod, select your specific area all around what you want to isolate, render only what is inside, and then maybe we want to trim this up a little bit. cut some more areas off the edge, cut a little bit more, and after trimming everything up, we have it completely isolated, and we can go back into Flashback and get our replay that we wanted to. And just like that, you can go from a survival world setting to a really clean replay in basically the blink of an eye. Like, that took me maybe a minute total. So right now the mod is still currently under development and is not on Modrinth yet, but it is in Ryan's Discord, so I will have the link to that in the description, and whenever he does have the first version on Modrinth, I will update the link to reflect there instead. But yeah, go ahead and join his Discord, as he's doing really cool stuff and posting a lot of really cool updates all the time. It's very obvious that he really cares about this mod and the community feedback. I kind of got a lot of the newbie questions out of the way, so I can help with a lot of the basic stuff if you do have any questions, to not have to flood Ryan with all that. Because believe me, I have asked him some dumb questions already as I was getting the hang of everything. But yeah, huge shout out there. That is a fantastic resource that the community is definitely going to want to get their hands on, so I want to be the first to advocate for it because it is super cool. If you want to learn more about super smelters in general, I'm including a world download that has many common designs on YouTube and compares them to what more knowledgeable farming communities have developed, so big shout out to the TMCC Discord and the amazing designers who make it a wealth of knowledge and actually decent farms, and a big shout out to all those designs that you've seen previously in this video that are not mine, so go check out all those cool designs there and give them some love and appreciation. So to give a little bit more context for all these super smelters and some more popular versions, I've made a quick write-up for all of these that you can find in the lectern on the world download. And this is intended as a resource for people wanting to learn a little bit more about both my old designs and some common ones on YouTube, just as a general starting place for how to compare smelters and more information on them. I think it'd be pretty useful for a lot of people. If you do want to learn more about smelters, this is a good place to start. And I always mention where I source them from, whose designs they are, and so that you can get the full picture and or go check out their video or Discord page. I really wanted to talk a lot more about both my old bamboo farm designs and why they're not as good as the one that I have now, and you can find that information in this world download if you are interested in the write-ups for both of these right here, just because this video is already getting really long and I don't want to bore everyone with that who's just not interested. So for the tutorials in this video, I'll be doing 3 quick guides. The first is a better version of the most popular super smelter design on YouTube that I spoke about earlier. The second is the bamboo smelter that can attach to the bone output of any common mob farm. And the third is the wooden item crafter system that can attach to the bamboo generator. So now's a good time to point out that if you do have a question about any of these builds, the best place to ask by far is my Discord Spud Central, where there are actual dedicated help channels for each of my farms. Please be patient and don't ping anyone directly, but there are a lot of people who can help out once you go in that space. Because a lot of people ask the same exact questions, I specifically designed the onboarding to direct you to where the answers to those questions are. So if you charge in and ask these questions when I've already directed you to the answer, just know that I will be disappointed in you. All my farms always have their corresponding schematic linked for free, so I would highly suggest learning how to use that mod so that you'll never have to follow tutorials again. There are a ton of useful videos on YouTube that you can learn from there, and it's a really great resource to get into if you've been procrastinating that. So enough talk, let's jump into the tutorial. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I didn't expect a video about smelters as kind of an add-on to my other farm to be my longest video yet, so thanks for sticking with me and being patient for this video to come out. These videos take a ton of time and effort to make, so as always I wanted to give a big thanks to everyone who feels like leaving a like or subscribing to the channel. I've been seriously enjoying making more deep dive content, and it seems like you guys appreciate it a lot too, so I'm looking forward to doing more videos similar to this format. Maybe a little bit less long because this is getting ridiculous. Stay starchy, and I'll catch you in the next video.